I remember when we first moved into this old farmhouse, the previous owners had done a very nice gesture. They had left us some wood to burn. And so when we moved in, it was the first time either of us had had a wood burning stove. So we were just merrily going out to the garden, picking up this wood that had been left in a big pile and just burning it in the wood burning stove. And I did notice that there was an awful lot of smoke that was building up inside the wood burning stove. And I thought, I've never had a wood burning stove, not really sure if this is normal. I'm kind of more used to open fires. So I kind of thought, oh, that's a bit odd. And then I started to notice this thick black tar that was starting to run down the inside of the glass. And I thought, that doesn't look
That's not right.
that doesn't look okay. So that was our first lesson in not using wet wood.
So we decided this is time to start educating ourselves on wood. The first thing that we did is we got a chimney sweep to come out and clean our flues. He came out, started cleaning out our flues, and quickly realized that there was a lot of creosote buildup that had actually formed inside the flue. And he said the reason for that was because we were burning wood that was simply too wet. He then gave us a crash course on the kind of wood we should be burning on our wood burning stove, and told us that the moisture level in that wood has to be below 20%. So the thing is, when you pick up a piece of dry wood, how do you know what that moisture level is? Is it 30%? Is it 15%? Is it 8%? The easiest way to find out is to use a wood moisture meter.
So I'd never even heard of a moisture meter. I had no idea what this thing was going to be, how big it was going to be. But our chimney sweep recommended this one, which is great because look how tiny it is. It's really dinky and small. He did say to me, don't be tempted to get the cheaper ones, the kind of made in China ones that you get off Amazon, because he said he's seen a million of those. And what happens is, because this has pins on it, these little metal pins just break off. So he said, get this one, get a really reputable brand. This one's a still one. And he just said, get a reputable brand one, just pay a little bit more because then it really will last and it really will work for a long time. And it's just really simple, and you literally just push it into the wood. So almost like you're skewering something, and then press the button, and then that's what will give you a reading. So once you get one of these moisture meters, if you're anything like us, you're just gonna be going around stabbing all the different bits of wood that you have lying around that you were thinking about burning. You're gonna be so curious to know how dry or how wet that wood is. So we obviously did this straight away to the pile that was left for us in the garden, and it was absolutely saturated.
Yeah.
It was so wet. So that we had to immediately realize, okay, that needs to get moved into the garage and just dry out. We decided to build a log store, which was great. Miles did that. And we then decided that every time we were going to go through the garden and do any heavy pruning, or if we had any real garden waste like branches or anything come down in the winter, that we would chop those up and use them. Different sizes for different things. So if it's a really tiny size, we'd use it for kindling, but if it's a bigger size, obviously it would kind of be more kind of in the log section. And those would go into the log store first, and then they would dry off there. And you typically kind of want to dry those outside in a log store for like a year to 2 years, which sounds like an incredible amount of time, but honestly, we think about how wet our winters are. That really is how long it takes for the whole wood to dry all the way through. And obviously your moisture meter will come in handy and tell you. And then once it's dried out for at least a year in our log store, that's when we move it into our garage. And then that's kind of when we are able to actually start to use it. So we'll have 2 areas in our garage. We'll have one which is basically new stuff that's come in from the log store. That typically gets left there for a year. And then the bin next to that, the area next to that we've created, that's the one that's ready to use. So that's the one we actually, sift through during the winter. So it's kind of like a whole process. But obviously when you buy kiln-dried logs, so from an actual company, you're actually skipping that entire process yourself, and it's just ready to use.
So if you're going to start collecting and burning your own wood, it's actually quite important to use a wood moisture meter to actually help you develop a process. I tested the log store outside with the wood moisture meter today. Logs that we cut last year are just over 31%. The logs in our garage in the right bin have been drying there for a year. They're at around 25 to 26%. And the logs that are in the bin next to that, which are the ones that are ready to burn, are around 14 to 15%.
So the log store that Miles built is kind of like your traditional, typical kind of small log store. And it does have a little overhang to prevent the rain and snow from going onto the logs. But typically if the wind is blowing and the rain is driving, then typically the rain kind of will come in at an angle and it will wet those kind of front logs. So, you're never going to keep it exactly 100% dry unless obviously you completely covered it. And if you completely covered it in plastic or something like that. But even if you're covering it and it's outside, it's still worth remembering that the UK has got an incredible amount of humidity. We're a very humid country, so we get a lot of fog and that kind of thing, that mist. And all of that is wet weather, and that will be kind of penetrating into your logs. So even if you've got it covered with plastic, it's worth remembering that you might actually be trapping that moisture and actually creating kind of more of a moldy, festery kind of environment for that log. So actually that's why you kind of want your log store kind of open, to have that air circulating and keeping it all nice and dry. But you do want to make sure that you dry your logs out in your log store first and then move them into a covered area where they really aren't getting any water on them at all.
That's actually a really great point, because we have got some logs that have been fully dried. They're right at the bottom of the log store, so all the rain that actually does come down pours over them. They were really wet, so I put the moisture meter into that. It came up with a code that said OL, which means over limit, which means that the moisture level in those logs is over 40%. So they're not good to burn. And
a moisture meter really is a must for anybody, even if you're not doing your own wood, even if you're not cutting and drying your own wood and you're literally buying kiln-dried wood. So that you know that the wood that you're buying is credible and is coming out at the moisture level that you need it to. But it's also, for example, if you stored it in a kind of maybe a damp basement, or you stored it outside, in a log store, and you just had it out there for a certain amount of months, you want to still be checking, even if it's been purchased kiln-dried logs, you still want to be checking and making sure that you haven't accidentally made it wet, or the environment hasn't wet the wood. And then, of course, you're using that wet wood. Honestly, for such a small, simple gadget kind of to have next to the fireplace, it's a very, very useful tool, and I think it's really a must.
And on the flip side of that, you talk about wood that gets overly wet and overly moist. The opposite also does apply. If you're keeping your wood in a very warm room, where there's a lot of the moisture that's actually been removed because your wood burning stove is generating so much heat, that wood dries out, and then you drop into the kind of 8% point, which makes that wood a little bit too dry. It's actually going to burn quicker than it needs to, and it's probably not going to emit as much heat as you want to. So as you said, it's just finding that right balance of always trying to maintain that wood at that kind of 14 to 15 to 20% mark.
So ideally, you just want a space that's clean and dry, hopefully damp free. So you just kind of really want to think about that, because you don't want to be paying a premium for kiln-dried logs and then kind of not helping yourself by then making that wood too wet or too dry. And then if you are wanting to create your own wood, as Miles was saying, you just kind of need to really plan out where that wood is going to be stored. When we started doing it, honestly, we had no idea. We was like, oh, we'll just chop it down and leave it on the side for a few months and then we'll use it. No, and it takes up quite a lot of space.
You need a lot of space.
So if you're a rural property and you've got land, you've got a big garden, you've got maybe you've even got like an outbuilding, like an old barn or something, that would be great. That's fantastic. And then you really kind of typically want to create 3 different areas. One, which is your fresh cut, just come out of the garden, chuck it in there and know that you can forget about it for at least 2 years. Another one, which is your middle ground, that's the stuff that's already been dried for kind of like a year. So that's kind of in rumination, that's the one that's happening. And then the other one on the other side, which is your go-to using that season. So you kind of want to have those 3 different areas and basically keep moving. So as you've got this one that's dried out and done 2 years, and that's going to move into that area, and then that's going to move into that area. So little tip, don't just keep chucking stuff on top, because we did that the first year and we quickly realized that was the wrong thing to do, because then as you're going in and just getting more offcuts from the garden, chucking it in and chucking it on top of that section, you kind of come back a year later and go, oh no, all the fresh stuff is on the top, all the dry stuff is on the bottom. We've now got to try and get all of this dried stuff out. So you do need to start just thinking about a tidy process right from the get-go, so that you can easily access the stuff that you're kind of putting on, and then you can move that, put it into the next section, and still have a kind of a process going. So there is a little bit of thought and care that needs to go into your planning with regards to actually having an area for your own cutting and drying of your wood.
And if that's just too much of a hassle, just buying kiln-dried logs is the way to go.
From a sustainable and reputable source.